This is episode 1 of the Multinational Money Podcast.
Welcome to the Multinational Money Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny, and if you're interested in expat life, financial freedom, and making the most of global opportunities, then this is your podcast. This is a brand new podcast, first episode that I'm putting out right here, and I hope that with these episodes, with the guests that I bring on, I, and above all, they can inspire you and to help you when it comes to your own situation, whether you're an expat moving to a new country, whether you're pursuing financial freedom, or whether you're just trying to make the most of opportunities that come your way in life and live your best life, then that's what this is all about. Having people on here to share their experiences, share their perspectives, so that you can gain the insight and knowledge that you're looking for. Now, my first guest on the podcast is Panda Boss Anna. Anna is a personal finance content creator and influencer from the UK. She has recently relocated to Poland after achieving financial independence to some degree. And in having Anna on the show, we're going to talk a bit about her background, how she started her YouTube channel, how she ended up moving to Poland and achieving financial freedom. So without any further ado, let's get right into the episode. Okay, I'm here with Anna, aka Panda Boss Anna. Welcome to the Multinational Money Podcast, Anna.
Hello, it's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, great to have you. If I upload in the correct order, this will be the first episode and you'll be the first guest on the podcast. So
amazing.
Very cool to have you as the first guest. Yeah, very excited. So let's get started. And the first question I have to ask is the name Panda Boss. I have to ask where it came from. I've been wondering for a while.
Yeah, you're not the first person to ask this, actually. It's a weird story. So a long time ago, I was with someone whose pet name for me was Panda. And after we broke up, I was like feeling a little bit sad whenever I heard the word panda, and I didn't want it to be that. I wanted to like sort of take it back and own it. So I sort of started just calling myself that. So when I came up with my channel, I wanted to incorporate Panda because I didn't want to use my real name initially. I wasn't sure how my work were going to react and all of this stuff. So I could use Anna, but I didn't want to use my surname. So I went for Panda. And then because it was about bossing life, Panda Boss just sort of worked. So that's where it came from.
Wow, it's actually quite deep and really cool, actually, now that you've told that story. Very cool,
Yeah.
very cool. Okay, so Anna, you're of Polish origin, but you spent a lot of time in the UK. So tell us a bit about your background, both any time you spent in Poland and time in the UK growing up.
So I was actually born in Poland, and then my family moved to England when I was 8 years old. So I pretty much consider myself, well, I have British nationality now and British passport and everything. So I consider myself British. Spent most of my life there pretty much. And then I only moved back to Poland very recently. And it was one of those things that was sort of, I always said never, like I would never go back to Poland and I would be in England forever. And then it just sort of changed. So it made me really start believing in the quote, never say never. So whole new meaning. But yeah, I sort of spent my early childhood years in Poland, then the majority of my life in England. So like my schooling, my whole career in finance pretty much. And then only now I've moved to Poland to have a bit of a quieter life, I think.
Yeah, we'll come back to your move to Poland a bit later in the video and also to your career when we get round to that section of the video. But yeah, very interesting. I was curious as to how much time you'd spent in both countries. So, okay, so you grew up in Poland and moved to the UK. Nice. And so growing up in Poland but living in the UK, how have both cultures influenced the person that you are today?
So I think that I've predominantly been influenced by England, to be honest, because I don't really remember too much from my days in Poland as a child. it's really weird because when I hear people talking about, oh, I remember this when I was 5, I'm like, how? Like, I really don't. So I think really the only thing is, I suppose, having Polish parents just sort of makes you have slightly different values when it comes to certain things, but it's nothing that's like concrete. So, silly things like going out anywhere, like you have to look a bit more presentable than I suppose my British side wants to, and all of that kind of stuff. And I suppose partly as well, I think it's why I took a lot longer to start investing. I think I didn't realize that until I moved to Poland, that actually the mentality here is still very much like, oh, it's very risky and you shouldn't really do that. And you would be surprised how many people I know who still save money like in cash at home. And I was just like, oh my God, like I can't cope with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, slightly different sort of attitude to money, to risk, and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that's pretty much the only way I feel like it's sort of influenced my life. But subconsciously, I could not know about things.
Yeah, the presentability one is a funny one because I remember in the UK, like we used to all just go to lectures at university in joggers and hoodie. And then taking that same approach when I was on study abroad in France, while there's people going in shirts and jeans and smart shoes, you definitely stood out. So it's funny how culture like impacts different parts of life, especially as well as you said, like in investing and saving money as well.
Oh yeah, 100%. But I remember it's like so funny because I had my block of flats was opposite to Sainsbury's when I lived in London. And I remember like, I would go looking terrible, but I mean, I went in pajamas once. And I'm like, if I went to a supermarket in pajamas in Poland, they would lock me up for being insane.
Yeah. But that's probably a very common sight in the UK, especially if that Sainsbury's is near a university campus. Yeah. So we'll go a bit into your professional life, your studies now as well. So did you go to university? And if so, what did you study? How long were you at university for?
So I did, but I didn't finish it. So essentially what happened was I initially wanted to be a psychologist, actually. That was my sort of big dream, was to be a psychologist, a criminal psychologist, actually. And I applied for Sheffield University. That was like my big dream, to go to Sheffield. I fell in love with the city, and for psychology at the time, I don't know what it is now, but it was like one of the top universities in England for psychology. So I applied and I was very confident that I would get in because I always got good grades throughout my school life. I'd never got lower than a B in anything. So, I got my conditional offer based on my predicted grades. And then I missed one of my A's by literally 3 marks. Like, it was insane. And I called them and I was like, can I still, you can see on the results, it's only 3 marks. And they said, sorry, because we're like oversubscribed, because we're one of the top universities, we can't let anyone who doesn't get the grades get in. And I didn't want to go through contesting like the marks and stuff like that. So I said, well, what can I do? I've already moved here. Like, I need to go to this university. And they said to me, you can go through human communication science. And this was essentially, they've renamed it now to speech therapy. And that's what it was. And they said 50% of the modules are psychology and the other 50 are like, speech therapy stuff. So I did that. And they said at the end, you can do a year's conversion to psychology. So I did it, and I absolutely, I can't describe to you how much therapy. The psychology modules I absolutely loved. It was so fascinating, but the speech therapy I hated. And I'm the kind of person where if I'm not passionate about something and I don't have the motivation, I just won't do it. So I said to myself, if I'm not getting a first, I'm not doing it. So I said to them, can I change course, please, to accounting and finance? Because I was always good at maths, always good at finance. And I did accounting as one of my A levels. So they said, yeah, no problem. So I actually got in to change for second year to accounting. But at the same time, I applied for an apprenticeship and I got it. So I actually left university and then started working for the civil service. And they paid for me to do my chartered accountancy. So I did that whilst working. I got paid time off, I got paid a salary, and they paid for my qualification. So that's my uni story.
Wow. But it's a really interesting one, I think, particularly now. Probably when you and I were going to university, it was like on everyone's mind, like it was university or nothing kind of thing. But now seeing, the UK is obviously different than the US. There's the caveat there. But even with that, people can find routes like apprenticeships or careers that don't necessarily require going down the university route. And still, make good money or get qualifications that will allow them to progress in their career. So it's good, and I'm glad it worked out for you as well in your case.
Thank you. So it's funny because I don't know whether it's similar in Spain, and it would be interesting to hear your thoughts if you know about this, because it's crazy how different it is in Poland in terms of career paths, because in Poland, there is still very much that mindset of, well, if you don't have a degree, you're an idiot, basically. And, I looked at so many jobs, which, back in England, my CV is, not to toot my own horn, but my CV is amazing. And, any job I applied for, I would get an interview like that. And most of the jobs I would get the offer afterwards. Like not every single one, obviously, but like the majority. But every single one I would get an interview at least. Whereas in Poland, all of the jobs I applied for that were finance related, I didn't even get an interview. And I'm like 99% sure it's because they can see I don't have a degree. Because when you look at the job ads, they say they want SEMA or like chartered accountancy plus a degree in finance. I'm just like,
No.
how is like, but all my experience, like, it's insane.
Yeah, it is kind of like that in Spain. And in Spain, people tend to also do a master's, the same as in France. Like in France, particularly if you're going down the finance route, it's like if you don't have a master's degree, you're going to be very limited to how far you can go in finance. So because when I was finishing my university and I wanted to go and work in Europe afterwards, I knew that part of my next steps had to involve a master's of some form, which I ended up getting like a a master's degree in the UK and master's in France. So I ended up on the right track. But it's very true, it's probably just the way the education, the cultures are in both countries. There's so many more employment pathways in the UK that someone can go down compared to in some of these European countries, like we just mentioned.
Very true. It's very sad, but hopefully it will change.
Yeah, we keep hope, yeah. So you didn't like psychology, but you did like accounting and finance. So what particularly did you like about it? Was it just that you were good at it, or were there other parts of it that you particularly liked as well?
I think because I was good at it, but mostly because it's black and white most of the time. Like, I don't like wishy-washy grey area type stuff. So with finance, it's most of the time it's either right or it's wrong, like 2 + 2 = 4. Like there's no grey area. So I think that's why I always enjoyed maths and finance. And yeah, I think it helps when you're generally good at it, and it kind of comes a little bit easier than the things you have to write essays about and go, oh my God, but is this right? And it's so subjective, and am I going to do well, and all the stress. So yeah.
Yeah. And did that translate into the job that you got after leaving university as well? The same things?
Yeah, so I started off as essentially a finance assistant, and then I very quickly moved up the ranks. So actually, a lot of people were quite surprised, but I essentially went from making like 16K a year to like 65K a year in like 5 years. So,
Wow.
um,
Very impressive.
yeah, thank you. But I worked really hard. It was a big goal
Of
of
course, yeah.
mine, and I made sure that that was reflected. I worked long days when I needed to. I made sort of connections where I needed to. I wasn't scared to network. I wasn't scared to take on work. And the only thing I had to learn how to do is delegate, because once you sort of go up the ranks, it becomes impossible to do everything yourself. But because I'm a
Yeah.
perfectionist that struggles to trust people, it was really difficult to let go initially.
Yeah.
So that was a big learning curve for me. But it helps, I think,
Yeah.
the job just before I left England, I just had the most amazing team. I pretty much never checked their work after a while because I just knew it would just be great. So unless they asked me, like, can you have a look at this? I just trusted them. And, if they sent me something, I would feel so confident to just send it on to my boss, for example, just forward, see this. Whereas in the beginning, like, I couldn't have done that with my first team. So it was a big learning curve, but helps when you have good people under you.
Yeah. And so this leads nicely into the next question I had for you, which was, how difficult was it for you to take the decision to leave your career and pursue your own goals, your own content creation, and once you'd achieved financial independence?
So, really difficult. Like more difficult than I thought it would be. I think when I made the decision initially, I didn't expect it to happen so soon in terms of leaving. I still thought it would take me many years. Then I decided I was going to put my flat on the market because I thought it was going to take like a year to sell it at least. I sold it within a couple months, which kind of forced my hand a little bit because I was like, okay, do I take this? And I made zero profit. I just sort of broke even. But I was okay with that. And I was like, do I take this and break even? Or do I reject it, hope for a better offer, and run the risk that I won't find another buyer? Because I wasn't sure what was going to happen. It was sort of still pandemic times and all this kind of stuff. So I decided to take it. And then thanks to that, I kicked off the house build and I moved in with a friend, which meant my outgoings were a lot less. And then my YouTube channel as well kind of skyrocketed a little bit. And I made enough money to sort of be able to pretty much build my house without a mortgage. And then I was like, okay, I think it's going to be time to go and sort of finish off the house whilst I'm in Poland and stuff like that. So all of that was like great in my head. But when it actually came to sort of handing my notice in and saying goodbye to my team and the people I worked with, it was incredibly hard. Like I cried so much. And I think it was partly the nostalgia of sort of leaving England, partly the people, and partly just like, oh my God, like what is life going to be like now? Like I have no idea. But I went a little bit crazy at the airport. I bought so many things with like Queen Elizabeth and England and things like that. So, yeah, it was a little bit difficult. But I think it helps that I'd spent a lot of time here anyway during COVID, and my parents moved back. So I was visiting them a lot and my grandparents and sort of overseeing the build. So that kind of eased the transition a little bit because it wasn't like I just went from going once a year for 2 weeks to suddenly living here. It was a nice little sort of transition period.
Okay, nice. So we've talked a bit about your career now. Now let's talk financial independence and personal finance. So where did your personal finance journey kind of start?
I think it was 2019 that I could say it really started because I was never very good with my own personal finances up until then. So whilst I was generally good at finance and managing other people's budgets, I was never very good at managing my own. And I think it just came with like, I make a lot of money, so why does it, like, my family would laugh at me because they'd ask me, oh, how much was this? And I'd be like, I don't know. Like I go in and like I get what I want and then buy it, sort of thing.
Like a rap song almost.
Yeah. So, it was sort of, I wasn't really focused on saving, investing, and pretty much since my early 20s, I had a consumer loan that I took out as soon as I got my first real job. I was like, great, I can get a loan now. And I wanted 4,000, but then they said, oh, if you take 7, you'll get a better interest rate. And obviously that sucked me in. And pretty much throughout my whole 20s, I was like in this loan because I then refinanced it, took more out and, all of that. And then in 2019, I went through a little bit of a mental breakdown. I had so much happen that year that I just sort of broke down, and my doctor signed me off from work for 5 weeks, and they said, go to Poland, be with your family. So I did, and that's pretty much where it all started. So I went to spend time with my family, decided that maybe I would prefer this kind of slow life. I would prefer to be near a family, and actually maybe I could afford to build a house here without a mortgage, rather than be in London paying off a mortgage for pretty much the rest of my life. So that's where sort of the idea bloomed. And then because I had all this free time on my hands, I started like YouTubing, not as in my channel, I mean watching YouTube and watching like financial YouTube and, how to make extra money and like all this kind of stuff. And then I came back and just started hustling, essentially. I just like, it's generally very all or nothing with me. And I just went all in and I was like, okay, anything I can do to pay off this debt, save money and, move as soon as possible. So I was doing everything. I was doing surveys, user testing. I was doing 0 hours contracts. I was teaching English, everything I could do. And that's how it all started, essentially.
Okay. And did you discover the FIRE movement around the same time, or was that a bit further down the line?
Around the same time. It wasn't necessarily straight away, but through that kind of starting that topic, I started stumbling across videos on financial independence. And it really resonated with me because it was, without sort of knowing what it was called, it's kind of what I wanted. It was like, okay, I don't want to live the rest of my life thinking I hate this job, I hate this environment, but I can't quit because I have a mortgage to pay, because I have bills to pay, and feeling that kind of stress. So through that, I sort of accidentally stumbled upon like passive income and then investing. And then I started investing like little bits and stuff. And then I started talking to someone about it in my 0 hours job, which was actually at a concert venue. So there were a lot of students working there basically for 0 hours. And I started talking to them about all of this stuff. And they were like, whoa, like that's really interesting, really helpful. And that's where my idea for the YouTube channel was born. I was like, okay, cool. Like people actually find this interesting. So I started, like, I made a couple videos, but I didn't really have much time to keep going and making them regularly. And then we went into lockdown and suddenly I had all the time in the world. So I started making more videos and
Yeah. It's funny. There's a lot of lockdown babies that parents have had, but there's a lot of lockdown babies that came in the form of businesses, YouTube channels, new ventures, ideas, etc. Which is, I think it's one of the, it was definitely a tough time for everybody. But it was very much, I had the mentality, probably did as well. It's like, you can make the most of this time or you can just like wallow in it. So I was the same. That was the time when my YouTube channel kind of started as well during lockdown. So yeah, but yeah, good for you. So we also kind of touched on this a little bit earlier on, but how did you feel about how your work, your family, your friends would react when you started the YouTube channel? You said you didn't put your real name precisely because you didn't know how they were going to react, but how were the reactions initially?
So they were all actually really good. I was worried how people would take it, but I think the majority of people found out after I was already quite successful. So I think that helped, because I think I felt a little bit embarrassed, I guess, at the beginning, because I was like, well, what if no one watches it, and all of this stuff. But no, everyone received it very well. Everyone was like, oh, really? Like a channel about finance? Like, oh, I'll check it out. And it was fine. My work as well was fine with it. They just said, you can't really associate with us publicly because, we're not endorsing your channel or anything you say on it. So just keep us out of it, sort of thing. Don't tell people where you work publicly.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I continued not to really use my real name until much later, when I sort of knew I was leaving anyway. But I was still quite careful not to sort of mention exactly where I worked. I just didn't want any of that. So I sort of went down the official route, got my official, yes, this is fine, just don't associate with us kind of thing. And yeah, that was pretty much it. So I was quite happy that there was at least no negativity towards me. Whether there was any behind closed doors, I don't know, but there was none directed at me. So that was good.
So we discussed this when we went live about 2 weeks ago, kind of our perception and what we think of the FIRE movement. How has yours changed or evolved over the course of your personal finance journey?
So I think it started off with just wanting that black and white sort of freedom from work completely. So it was very much that whole, I need to calculate my FIRE number, I need to invest hundreds of thousands to start getting dividends to pay for everything. That was kind of my initial, because that's very much what's portrayed when you view the majority of videos. That is the main thing people talk about. But actually, as I've gone on, I've realized that for me, maybe it's not really about never working, because I like being busy. I've quit my 9 to 5 and I'm still working 12-hour days. I'm just like, how did this happen? I was meant to have more time. So I don't think I'm capable of doing nothing. But to me, it was very much sort of what I mentioned earlier of, I just want the freedom to be able to choose when I work, who I work for or with, and what I do. So the fact that, the majority of my income for me is through teaching English, that's different students all the time. So I'm not constantly doing the same thing. I get to talk to different people. I get to see different points of view. Sometimes it's more difficult. Sometimes it's easier. But, a couple of weeks ago, I had a really bad day. I woke up and I just felt awful. I felt so sad. I spent the whole day crying on the sofa for whatever reason. And I just really didn't feel like teaching. And the beauty of it was I just messaged my students. I was like, look, I'm having an awful day. My mind's not in it today. Can we reschedule to later in the week? And it was absolutely fine. So there's no way I could have really messaged my boss, at least not in Poland, and be like, I just need to, work my hours later this week. I would have had to take the day off or the day off sick. So I think for me, that flexibility and the fact I have it now, that I'm able to just work when I want, is amazing. It's taken off so much stress off my shoulders. And whilst, I'm not in a position where I can just quit work completely and have my investments pay all my bills, I'm in a position where I have money invested, so it's a little bit of a safety net. It pays me small dividends, but it does. And I'll be growing that. And I don't have a mortgage, so no one can take my house away. So I don't have that stress. My stress is, can I feed myself and my cats? Because I have a lot of them. But that's about it, Even if it comes to heating, for example, I have a heat pump, so it's all electricity based. But if I was really struggling and didn't have much money or something like that, I have like a fireplace. So, and I have like, I swear to God, like 2, 3 years supply of wood to burn in this fireplace. Because I was like, right, I need to stock up in the event something happens. So yeah, I think it's a great feeling to have. And I think for me, that's my new definition of what I want financial independence to be for me. And I've achieved it. And of course, it's not to say I'm not going to strive for that final one, but I suppose it won't be as sort of going hard for it as I was previously. So I was very much focused on I need to be financially independent completely by 35, never work again, all my investments will pay my bills. Whereas that now I'm like, okay, if it's 40, it's fine because I'm not exactly living a stressful life right now. So yeah.
Yeah. And 12 hours a day, like, yeah, it's 12 hours, but it's stuff that you want to do, you've decided to do kind of thing. And it's out of choice that you do it, which is good as well. And another thing I realized as well is kind of, if you have a skill set, if you have the ability to bring value to someone, whether it's, editing videos, teaching English, whatever it may be, like you have some sense of financial independence because you can make your own way, you can make your own living in that sense. So that also changed my mindset around the FIRE movement as well.
Glad we're on the same page.
Okay, now let's talk a bit more about the moving abroad kind of stuff. So you mentioned Poland, I guess, yeah, because of family, personal reasons that you chose Poland, right?
Yes. So I always knew that I wouldn't stay in London long term. I think the idea of spending your whole life paying off insane house prices was never for me. And I hated the crowded vibe, the tubes, everything like that. So it was always in the back of my mind that eventually I want to move out of London. And I was like, okay, well, countryside in England, I'll just make it countryside in Poland because it'll still be cheaper. So whilst countryside in England would have been loads cheaper than London, it's still not as cheap as Poland. And yeah, having my family around is a big bonus. And I knew my money would go a lot further, having earned most of it in pounds and then converting it and spending it in zloty. So that was a big factor. And I think if my family weren't here and I still sort of found that FIRE movement somehow, I'd probably still look at moving, maybe not necessarily out of the UK, but potentially somewhere like Scotland, like rural Scotland, because I know like Edinburgh and Glasgow are like crazy expensive. But, I remember reading an article once that compared what you can buy for the same amount of money in London and rural Scotland. And it was like, here's a 1-bed flat in Kensington or a castle in Scotland. Like,
yeah. Yeah. Big difference, yeah.
So
yeah. Also, putting Poland aside, would you have ever considered, like a digital nomad hub like Portugal, for example, or Bali? Would you have ever considered this if there wasn't the personal connection to Poland?
Oh, yes. I often say that now that I've been on a couple of holidays there, if my family weren't here, or I wasn't as close to my family, I would live in Thailand. Thailand is like my paradise. Like, I don't know what it is, but I've completely fallen in love. Bali would be good too. So obviously depends on how their visas work and stuff like that. And Bali is very similar. But you could live in Bali and just pop over to Thailand. So yeah, I loved it. I loved watching those videos, digital nomad, what my day looks like and stuff like that. So definitely, 100%.
Yeah. Because I mean, in theory, yes, someone in your position could do something like that, be a digital nomad, move around the world. But, you know, it's very much personal preference. Like if you have strong family or friend ties close by, then of course that's going to have a big impact on your decision.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I was thinking that actually because I was like, I pretty much work almost 100% of my time remotely now, because I have a few students that sort of visit me in my home, but actually the majority are online. I do translations, which are remote, and my YouTube channel you can do from anywhere as well. So those are my three main sources of income, and they are all remote. So
exactly, yeah. Cool. And staying kind of on this theme of, you know, digital nomad, independent business location. So I remember you saying at some point you had a UK company set up. How are taxes in Poland? Do you have some kind of tax efficient structure in place, or do you just have like a general business setup?
no, I have just a general business setup, and I hate the taxes in Poland. Oh my God, they drive me insane. They are so bad, and I'm really hoping. So we've had a government change quite recently, and I'm really hoping that the new government, sooner rather than later, will introduce some changes to the tax structure, because the old government introduced sort of new taxes where they did this trick which worked on a lot of people who only watched like the state TV, which had a lot of like propaganda and, you know, that kind of stuff. So they were like, we lowered taxes, we lowered income tax. And they did. Great, fabulous. But do you know what they did? They put up everything else. So actually most entrepreneurs were so much worse off because of it. And it's an insane jump for a lot of people. So we're kind of hoping that the new government will reduce that back to what it was previously. But yeah, there's not too much like tax efficient stuff that you can do here that isn't like majorly bureaucratic. Whereas, you know, in England, I had my limited company, which was super easy. You know, my accountant set it up. I had an online system that I logged in. I saw everything on there on that platform. And it was great because I could pay myself a salary. I could put my costs in there. And I could, you know, employ other people. It was great, you know, if you know about limited companies in England, you know. Whereas in Poland, I can't really set up a limited company because it's completely worthless unless you make like insane amounts of money. So I'm just self-employed, right? It's still called a company. So I still had to set up a company just to be self-employed, which is already bureaucratic enough for me. But if you think about England, most self-employed people do their own taxes, or they get an accountant to help like once a year maybe. Whereas in Poland, most people who are self-employed have an accountant they pay monthly, because you have to do monthly tax returns, which is insane to me. Like so insane. Like,
oh my gosh.
The fact every month I have to think about sending my accountant everything, and paying monthly like taxes is just mind-boggling. So yeah, I'm not a big fan here of taxes.
Well, it's not even that bad in Spain. Like self-employed people in Spain is every quarter. Like, wow, every month is a lot of work.
Yes. And I was laughing with someone because essentially, you know, stereotyping a little bit, but I think I'm allowed. Polish people tend to be a little bit stingy with their money when it comes to like, if I can do it myself, I will. So, you know, I've come from England and I'm like, you know, I'm paying someone to do this, paying someone to do that. Like, why am I going to do it? I don't want to do it. And they'll do it for like less money than I'm going to earn in that time. Whereas here it's very much like, no, I will do it myself, you know? So the simple fact that all of these people pay hundreds of zloty per month for an accountant really shows that you can't really do it yourself. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay, well, that's a bit of a sour note to end this on, but so thank you for your insights anyway regarding your personal life, financial independence journey. Very inspiring, and I think it's great as well to see like a woman that's done that as well, because it's a quite male dominated space, and to see other women who are succeeding in the space is really great as well. So well done. A closing tradition that I am introducing on this podcast is to ask a fun question to every guest. Okay. So your fun question, Anna, is when you go to the UK or when you go to Poland, what things do you miss in one country that the other doesn't have?
Okay. I guess maybe not necessarily country, because I'm sure I could find it in the country. But in England, so one of the things I miss in England when I'm in Poland is the sheer amount of food and takeaways that's available. Whatever cuisine you feel like having, you can have it. And even if you're in small towns around England, you're like, fancy a Chinese, fancy an Indian, fancy Domino's, like pretty much anything you want is like just a phone call or an app away. And on the same note, actually, ordering from supermarkets. So Ocado, oh my God, I miss Ocado. Being able to just food shop online and have them bring it to my door. Yeah, my two things from England that I genuinely miss so much. And then when I was in England, in terms of Poland, I think for me, the only thing that I missed was my family. So I didn't know Poland well enough before I left to miss anything whilst I was in England. And because I'm so sort of set in my British ways, I feel more at home in England. So pretty much, I've just come back from a trip to London actually, and other than my family, I don't really miss anything about Poland. My family and my pets, just to be clear. Whereas in England, like,
can't forget the pets.
Of course, it's like my own family. But goes without saying that I miss my friends, but there are actually things about England itself that I miss, which is mostly food related, because I'm a little bit obsessed about food. So
I think we all are to one extent or another.
My friend laughs at me every time I come, because pretty much the first thing I say when I plan a trip is like, okay, so what are we eating when? Because we have to plan out to make sure that I try out all of the different things I miss. So like, when are we having Indian? When are we having Chinese? When are we having Nando's?
Nando's, it's like the compulsory one. Every time I go to the UK, there has to be a Nando's involved.
I'm glad it's not just me.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, Anna, thank you so much again. Guys, be sure to check out Anna on YouTube. I'll leave her link in the video description on YouTube and in the episode notes on the podcast platform.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and to everyone who's listened, especially if you've made it this far.
There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed this first episode and you found it informative and helpful. As I mentioned, be sure to check out Anna's links in the YouTube video description and in the show notes on podcast platforms. If you'd like to support the podcast, the work that I do here on the channel, then you can sign up to either YouTube membership or Patreon, to the different levels of membership. And in return, you will get to find out who the guests of the podcast are in advance of the episodes going live, and you'll also get the chance to submit your own personal questions to the guests, which will be answered in a private forum for you to hear. And with that said, till next time, I'll see you on the next one, and let's get this money.